Howdy folks, Dave here at Thunder Mesa Studio, where today I'm starting on a new locomotive project for the On18 Calico Mountain line. And for those who don't know or who may not recall, On18 is 1/48 scale O-scale trains running on 9mm gauge track. 9mm gauge, the same gauge that N-scale trains run on. So this is a very useful scale gauge combination for modeling light industrial railways in O-scale at 1/4 inch to the foot. At 1/4 inch to the foot, 9mm scales out to roughly 18 inches between those rails. And so that's great for modeling light industrial railways like you'd find around mills and mines and quarries and smelters and places like that. So I'm not going to be modeling a specific prototype here necessarily, but I am going to be drawing a lot of inspiration from the work of a fellow model maker and borrowing heavily from a project that they cobbled together. Back in my Workbench Wednesday video about On18 locomotives, I mentioned a model that Judy had created. This is actually an ON30 that it looks like he used some parts from a Bachmann Porter and built something that I could only describe as a saddle tank climax, but it's exactly the kind of home-built critter that I have in mind for this. I took one look at this and thought, man, that would be fantastic in ON18 also. I've acquired one of the newer Kato 11-109 mechanisms, and I've got to tell you, for being so small and compact, this thing runs amazingly well. I've already tested it out, and I can't believe how beautifully it runs, how smooth it runs. It's like a Swiss watch. So now I'm going to build sort of a like a flat car frame around it, and this is like the climax part of the locomotive. It's built like a Type A climax with a just basically a flat car frame, and then a steam engine mounted on top of that. So honestly, I'm just kind of making this up as I go. I have some general ideas, some dimensions in mind. It's about the same dimensions as my my little baby climax that I built. And this is some 1/32 of an inch thick scribed basswood. And I'm just cutting it to the general shape of the deck. Now I'll just flip this over and try to lay out basically just an outline of the drive unit. It's like about 11/16 wide. And this is 2 1/8 long. Now with that laid out, I'm going to frame this from the bottom, from underneath, with some 4x8s. Now with this braced up, I should be able to cut out the central portion for this motor hump without too much difficulty. Now I need to cut a couple of end beams, also out of 4x8, and those need to be notched for some Microtrain's N-scale couplers. These get glued onto each end. And then the side beam should fit in just like so. Paint this entire underframe with some, what is this, apple barrel chocolate bar. This is a really nice dark red brown. I also want to darken up all of this wood decking, so I'm going over it with some Minwax dark walnut. I would like to add a working headlight to this, which means I have to crack this drive unit open. There we go. Man, that's some nice engineering. There's the heart and soul of the thing, that can motor in there. This one's got a lot more weight than the earlier versions, the 11-103. I'll put a piece of tape on here to hold the motor in while I do this, and lay it on its side. And to further complicate things, I'm using a little micro LED, and LEDs are polarity specific, so I have to keep track of which is the positive side and which is the negative side. This is the positive side. I just marked it with a Sharpie up here so I wouldn't forget. Okay, here goes nothing. Make sure that doesn't interfere in any way with the mechanics. Now I'm cutting some holes through the Delrin case so I can run the wires back up through here. Okay. Everything fits, checks out, still runs. So now we can proceed with the rest of the build. A lot of the parts I'm going to be using for this have come from a kit from Barry McClellan at Railway Recollections. This is for an On18 Porter. Really cool little kit that he sells. And I also have a headlight. This is a resin casting from Boulder Valley Models. I just happen to have one of their headlights, and so I'm going to be using that. I just have to drill out the resin. So I'm starting with this one first, and then I will step it up and go to a larger bit, drilling it in from the bottom and also from the lens side, so those two holes meet up. All right, that should do it. Just big enough to hold a super bright, warm white micro LED. Now I need to be able to run the wires down through the smoke box, have them come out down here. I think this will actually be easier if I go ahead and glue the smoke box to the boiler and the saddle tank. It's starting to look like a locomotive. And now I can primer and paint these pieces. Now I need to make what is essentially a little black box that will fit over this this motor compartment and hide all of the mechanism. I'm building it out of illustration board, but you know, I could use styrene or wood or whatever. It really doesn't matter. And give something for the boiler to sit on top of. Now I'm making a yoke to support the front of the smoke box, and I've got a piece of 6x12. I'm using my Dremel with a grinding bit in there just to cut that circular shape out. Now all of this can be painted flat black. Now this whole assembly can be glued onto this. With the primer dry on this headlight, I can finish the paint job. Start by painting the interior silver, and I'll do the rest of it with Vallejo red. The lens frame I'm painting with some Vallejo brass, and I've CA'd it temporarily to a straight pen so I can hold on to it. Now I'm going to go ahead and CA the LED inside. I have a round acetate lens, but I want to fog the back of it so it will diffuse the light. Put the lens in. Now I can glue the lens frame right on top of that. There's a couple of drops of CA on the bottom of this. It's got some Wildest Ride in the Wilderness vibes, doesn't it? Back over here on the frame and motor assembly, I'm drilling a couple of tiny holes to accept a couple of tiny screws that will mount the motor to the frame I built. Sorry I don't know what size screws these are. I pulled them out of my jar marked tiny screws because I always save these things. Now I just need to carefully solder the headlight leads to the pickup leads. I already tinned these wires. These LEDs, by the way, in case you were wondering, they have clear silicone insulation on them, so you can't see it, but it's there. You have to melt it off before you can solder the wires on. I'm going to flip it around, see if I can do this side. I think we got it. Okay. Let's test it out, shall we? Try it over here on the Bandit Canyon Railway. I love it when a plan comes together. Well, with all the mechanical stuff done, I think it's time to get started on the cab. Don't you? For the cab and those board sides that give it that climax look, I designed this in Adobe Illustrator and cut these parts out on my laser with some 35/1000 of an inch thick brown laser board. I like this material because it's so close to 1/32 of an inch thick. It's makes the math real easy when designing things and putting things together. So now I'm going to assemble these parts. I think I'll start up here at the top of the cab wall. This little bit of trim piece for the roof. This is going to be an enclosed cab, just like Al Judy's design. I kind of like that. I haven't done an enclosed cab on any of the locomotives for Thunder Mesa or Bandit Canyon or Calico Mountain, any of them. So I think it's time, don't you? Next come these stake sides, and these go all the way down to bolt into the side of the frame on the bottom. So you've got some pre-drilled holes in those for that. And the front wall of the cab has 2 layers. This. The doors have an inner and outer frame. Just drop that outer frame on the top. And these inner window frames drop in like that. And the edge of those also help to key in the front wall. Kind of fits in there like a little puzzle piece. In fact, I think I can glue this front wall in right now. That right there. And this back wall is pretty unadorned. It just slides right in between. I've cut a little scrap of this laser board to go in here and act as a top for the fuel bunker, so I don't have to fill it up completely with fuel. Just kind of a false top there. And then the rear wall of the fuel bunker should fit right in between like that. Okay, now I'll get some primer on this and decide what direction I want to go with the colors. And as you can see, after some hemming and hawing, I decided to go with a Tuscan red with a bright red trim around the windows. And now I'm going to add lettering to the sides. I've decided this is going to be engine number 6 on the roster. And I've got some Woodland Scenics gold dry transfers. Now I know this is supposed to be a home-built critter, but you know, there's no reason it can't be a fancy home-built critter. I just think the gold's going to look really cool on this Tuscan red. So what the heck, we're going to go for it. Cut out one of these 6s. A piece of Scotch tape. Pick that up. Using tape like this makes it much easier to position the letters or numbers before you put them on. Now I'll just use a soft lead pencil. Go over that. Beautiful. Then I always take the backing sheet, go over it again. And I'll put a smaller one back here on the back of the fuel bunker. I want to have just, the basic idea of some kind of backhead inside the cab. So I, brought together some bits and bobs from my scrap box, some pieces of wire, and put this together. You've got a firebox, a throttle, a water glass, a couple of gauges. You got a steam pressure gauge, and then a pipe going up, steam pipe going up for the whistle. And that's really you're not going to be able to see any of this. It's just give the indication, the silhouette, I guess, of a backhead inside the cab. So I'm going to paint this all flat black now, and then I'll pick out some of the details with a small brush. And I can glue all of this backhead assembly right inside the cab where it lines up with the rear of the boiler. And I just spread some Zap canopy glue in here. And I can glaze these windows with some clear acetate. Okay, got all the windows glazed, and I just finished adding some grabs, some handles here, inserted into little holes on each side. Now, a fine locomotive like this needs a name, at least it does in my opinion, and I've decided to name number 6 here in honor of Bud Hurlbut. Bud Hurlbut was the man who designed and built the Calico Mine Ride and also the Calico Mountain Lumber Company, the log ride at Knott's Berry Farm. In fact, he is credited as being the father, the inventor of the modern immersive dark ride. So I thought it'd be very appropriate to name this locomotive after him, since it will be running on Calico Mountain most of the time. I'd originally planned to do an ON30 locomotive with Bud's name, but I think this is going to be better, since he'll always be at home over there on Calico Mountain. And I want to have an engineer in here too, and this guy, this cowboy looking fella, is from an old Revell wagon train set, I believe. But he's got this great upturned hat like a prospector. So I think once he's painted up and set inside there, he'll look just right in old engine number 6. But I need to shorten his legs a little bit for him to fit, so look away for squeamish. He had a weird void in his chest here from the casting process, so I filled that in with some acrylic modeling paste. And with that straw, I'll get some primer on him and paint him up for his new role inside the cab here. I also want to have some cylinders, at least part of them visible, as a way of explaining how the power gets from the boiler down to the wheels. Presumably this is a geared locomotive, so the cylinders will be put in a vertical fashion like this, up against the sides of the boiler. These, by the way, are out of my scrap box. I've got a couple of these, and they're from an old N-scale locomotive. While I wait for old Whittles to dry, I can start working on the cab roof, cutting out a piece of Bristol board for that. Now I'll paint the underside dark gray, and on the top side, put some black gaffer's tape for roofing. I'll just do a little bit of light weathering with chalks before I install it. clear coat on that. And now I can paint old Mr. Whittles. I like to start with the flesh tones. I'll use a little antique white for his shirt. Do a little faded denim blue for his pants. Do a little gray for the hair and the beard. A little dark brown for the vest. And some tan for his hat, I think. Then he's got to have a red neckerchief. I mean, that's pretty much a rule of old prospectors, right? Then I like to give him a dark wash. Just some watered down black here. Gets back into all the details and makes him pop a little better. Also makes him look kind of grimy, so he's not so clean and pristine down in the mines. All right, Whittles, in you go. Now, with him properly positioned, I can put the cab on. Remember, I can still access the motor and everything from underneath. All right, now the roof. I know from experience, this is the hardest thing to get on straight. Get down here so I can see. Now the cylinders can go in. Yeah, that adds a lot. Now it looks like it might actually work. I also have a selection of front number plates from Railway Recollections. I picked out number 6. Painting it with a little bit of Vallejo red and some brass. There we go. Number 9. Number 6. Now this is a 3D printed whistle from the Cumberland shops. It's not brass, it's resin, but I painted it brass. A hole in the roof here so I can mount it with a pin. Using some black thread for the whistle cord. I have 6 sets of steps to make, and these are cut from the same 35 thou laser board. Each one has pretty basic assembly, just 2 pieces. These upright hangers and then the step itself. Just putting them together with a little bit of CA. Now I've painted these dark brown, and I can go ahead and glue them into place. Get 1 on each side below the door, and then 2 on each of the end beams on either side of the coupler pocket. Now I have a whole slew of nut bolt washer castings to add. Each of these stakes coming down gets 2, and though I, pre-drilled the holes with the laser in the stakes, I have to drill through into the side frame of the car. So each of those gets 2, and then each of the steps gets 4. So this is going to take a minute. See you on the other side. Now with all 46 of those nut bolt washer castings installed, I can move on to the final details, the final finishing touches. I've got a bell here. This is another 3D print from the Cumberland shops. That is going to go right there. And I'll drill a hole through the cab up here for the bell cord. I got to have some lines coming down from the sand dome, and for the sand to get from there to the wheels. Got some music wire for that. And of course, in retrospect, this would have been a lot smarter to do this before I added the bell cord. But, you know, hey. I think I did mention that I'm making this up as I go. So that needs to come out of a hole in the sand dome and then basically disappear down here behind these boards. I want it coming out in front of this front wheel, so yeah, that's perfect. I want to have a real wood load in the back, so I'm going to use some sage twigs. I'm cutting them to length with my chopper. Then I can quarter these with my utility knife. We've got some cordwood. Put a layer of yellow glue here on the deck. And then I can just glue these in one by one. And for just a little light weathering with chalks, I'm going to add some white stains up here around the water fill cap on the saddle tank. And some pure black up here on the top of the stack and the roof to represent soot. Just a little bit of light weathering on the sides. Make this look like it's a hard working locomotive, even though it's, you know, got a fancy paint job. It still works hard for a living. I'll get a clear coat on there now to lock all that into place. And last but not least, I think it's time for couplers. I'm using some Microtrains N-Scale Universal Body Mount Short Shank couplers. The first thing I like to do is trim off the magnetic coupler trip pin. I'm not going to need that. Now I'll use a size 61 bit in my pin vise to drill a coupler mounting hole. And we just screw them in. I think that'll do it. Would you care to join me for the inaugural run of Big Thunder in Calico number 6, the Bud Hurlbut? And that's going to be a wrap from Thunder Mesa Studio today. Thank you all so much for following along with my On18 locomotive build. I hope you got a lot out of it. If you did, like, subscribe, share, and hit that notification bell to see more from Thunder Mesa Studio. You can also follow us over on Instagram at thunder.mesa and see what's new on the Thunder Mesa Studio website at thundermesa.studio. And of course, if you really enjoy what we're doing here at the channel and would like to show your support, you could do what these nice folks did and go over to patreon.com/thundermesa and show your support there. Until next time, keep moving forward, my friends. Adios for now.